Hello, good morning, everybody. It's Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. Therefore, it must be time for another teissTalk. We are live every Thursday morning at 10, every Tuesday afternoon at 4, when my co-host Jenny Radcliffe takes the stage. And we also archive these talks online. So if you want to catch up with them later, you can do. But of course, what's the point? You want to be here live. So we give you a taste of what we're going to be talking about over the next month. Next Tuesday, Jenny's going to be talking about the future role of the CISO. We're going to be talking about cyber career paths, the skills shortage, working with the hybrid working environment, that's a big one, 5G, passwords and authentication, all the major topics coming up on teissTalk. So do please put us in your diary, and we welcome back our continuing listeners and viewers. Welcome back if you've been before. If you're new, very, very warm welcome to you. And do spread the word. If you like teissTalk and you like the stuff that we're doing, please share it among your friends, colleagues, family, maybe not family, and spread the word. We love having more attendees. There's obviously the chat tab there. You can get involved. We've got some people saying hello, good morning to everybody there. We've also got the questions tab. If you want to ask a question at any stage during today's topic discussion, do use the questions tab to get in touch with us. We are going to be talking about resilience today in your organization, measuring your organization's cyber resilience. And this obviously comes across off the back of one of the more interesting cybersecurity stories of recent times, the Colonial Pipeline hack. So we're going to be addressing that, gossiping about what went on there, and also addressing how Colonial Pipeline could have been a bit more resilient, should be a bit more resilient, and can get back on its feet after hitting the news in such a catastrophic way. We're also going to give away a teissTalk mug, by the way. Yeah, tea tastes better from a teissTalk mug. I'm thinking of a song. There's a song in my mind, and it's a song about American critical national infrastructure. And that's the only clue I'm going to give you. American critical national infrastructure, and it's a song. If you can guess that, you win a teissTalk mug winging its way to you. I'll be stunned if anybody gets that. But listen, we have got some great panelists to talk about this resilience issue today. I will be hearing later from Martin Booth, who's Chief Information Security Officer at Euromoney Institutional Investor, and Ben Lindgreen, who's Head of Cyber Resilience at Pay.uk. And if you don't know who Pay.uk are, stay tuned, because they are absolutely massive, as are Euromoney Institutional Investor. For the moment, I want to welcome our first guest, who is a risk and resilience expert. Sandra Bell is founder and Chief Executive of the Business Reliance Company. Sandra, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And how are you?
I'm all right, yes. Somebody's had a go at the American Critical National Infrastructure song and has guessed American pipe, as in American pie. Sorry, Richard, not correct. No mug for you. There we go.
Oh, it's a good try, though.
Worth a try, yes. Thank you for joining us, Sandra. By the way, where are you joining us from? Where's home for you?
I'm in the UK. I'm in Basingstoke. Somebody has to be.
Nothing wrong with Basingstoke. Very convenient location. And tell us a bit about your background. There's an intriguing thing on your website that I found that I thought was interesting. You apparently, it says here, you identified the injury mechanism associated with explosive blast and patented a material system that now forms the basis of all modern bomb disposal equipment.
Gosh, yes, that's going back a bit, Jeff. Yes, absolutely. I started my career as a scientist. So my PhD is in personnel blast protection. And so, as it says there, what I did is I worked as part of a multidisciplinary team to identify, what happens to people when they with improvised explosive devices. And so, essentially, we identified that it was a stressed wave going through the body, not squashing things together. Actually, that ruptures the alveoli, and then you sort of drown in your own fluid. So essentially, what we did was we, put in from the acoustics and the physics people in the audience, we put in a notch filter, and got rid of the particular frequency, and the rest is it's used all over the place now. So it's the bomb disposal suits, it's the same physics behind sort of submarine stealth, the same physics behind car impact bags, airbags, and indeed footballers' shin pads as well. So yeah, I have taken a mould of Michael Owen's leg in my past.
Wow, that is a claim to fame. That's one of those things where you tell somebody 3 things about yourself and only one of them's true, and that's the one that's true. Astonishing.
Yes.
So it's the frequency. You can isolate the particular frequency, and if you can get rid of that, actually the whole thing gets mitigated.
Absolutely. If you think of your lungs, they're tiny. So and any construction. I mean, your body's made out of sort of construction material. And if you think of any construction material, it's really, really good in compression. but not so good intention. And so essentially you get a stress wave going through. It then hits the interface. It's a sort of compressive wave. It hits the interface with the air, gets reflected back as a tensile wave, and then just rips the bit apart.
Good God! Wow. So, how did you get from that to risk and resilience? What's been your
well, it was I sort of worked as a scientist, for so then because obviously I was in the counter-terror world, sort of working for the counter, sort of in that space, and then moved into whole sort of different areas, and then I was working as technical director for innovation strategy in the UK's MOD. When we had 9/11, and so I sort of jumped out into sort of Whitehall world, into a think tank to try to sort of push and cohere and create a debate around that homeland security, and how do we sort of cohere as a nation or nations around that threat. So work policy and strategy. Then jumped out into the operational sphere, doing a bit of, sort of not just advising on it and writing policy and strategy, but actually doing it for real. And that's where I am.
Interesting. Interesting. We're going to be coming at this from a sort of cyber point of view, but obviously you'll have dealt in that career with risk and resilience in various different sort of areas. Are there things about the cyber aspect of risk and resilience that stand out compared to resilience from, for example, a terror attack or an adversary trying to do things like that?
Yeah, I think the biggest, and I think, as you say, we started with the pipeline. The biggest thing is that IT is an enabler for business, just like we've seen that the pipeline is an enabler for society. It provides the oil that goes to the petrol, etc., and it allows people to things to happen. So you can't look at cyber attacks and cyber resilience just in the IT sphere. You've actually got to look at the wider whole. So when it comes to, and I think the pipeline attackers, brought that into stark focus. You can only go so far with, sort of putting security in, doing what I would call the engineering resilience, so, duplicating things, having high availability without getting single points of failure, blah, 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 that we all talk about in this space. But actually, you're never going to stop it. It's going to happen. If somebody wants to get in, they will get in, regardless of what you've put in place. And so therefore, what you've got to also do is to look at mitigating or at least managing those impacts. And it struck me, so reading some of the news that I've seen over the past, past few days, is that number one, the company was, sort of not ready or realizing what those impacts can be. And then again, society as a whole, thinking it'll never happen. We've invested loads on security. It's a super, duper, sort of resilient IT system. Actually, just having a resilient IT system and having super duper security is not cyber resilience. It's got to be that whole thing.
Interesting stuff. Oh, we've had another guess at the song. Sorry, Mark, times they are changing. Not correct. We're looking for a song about critical national infrastructure. Think what critical national infrastructure can mean in the US. Anyway, be surprised if anyone gets it. Sandra, it's interesting this. I wonder about one of the issues here being that you've talked about this idea of, it's when, not if. And I think that's a sort of accepted aspect of cybercrime, cyber activity. The thing is, if you're an IT security manager, if you're a CISO, it's not a very good message to have of, well, whatever you put in place, it's going to fail. So let's think beyond that to when it does fail. I wonder whether the cybersecurity community it struggles with this resilience thing, because it means acknowledging that you will fail, that cybersecurity will fail. That's the whole point of resilience is, look, you've got to be resilient when you're attacked and when your defenses fail. Do you think that's part of it? Do you see that in organizations where the IT security guys go, look, we've got this covered, it's not going to happen?
Well, I do see that defensive. You're absolutely right. I see that defensive on the cybersecurity side of things. But actually, if you actually go to the CEO and the board and say, do you know what? I'm actually managing risk. That's what it's all about. It's just about managing risk. And they say, well, it won't be 100%. They'll go, well, yeah, I worked that one out. Because that's what I do. That's I'm running a business and and I know about risk. That's what I know about risk is that it's about sort of sort of defending against, you can defend against the negative impacts, but you also stack the odds in favour of the positive outcome. And that's, being resilient as an organisation and balancing risk is what the CEO and what the board does. So if you can get the CISO, the brave CISO that will go up and say, actually, I've taken it this far, and this is the residual risk you've got in place, I think they'll find they'll be really pleasantly surprised. Everyone I've sort of helped get into that boardroom to get that message has been thanked. They won't be thanked, however, if they leave it until the attack has happened and said, well, it was going to happen anyway, etc. Got to do it beforehand. But if you get in there beforehand, explain how far you've taken it, what measures you've got in place, and what that residual risk is, and the business then has got something to plan from. They go, okay, yeah, I've got that worst case scenario. I can go and put something in place. I know what my responsibility is. At the moment, they're left in the dark. And so they'll be pleasantly surprised.
It's interesting that. So in your experience, when you have those conversations where the chief executive or the risk managers in an organization get to hear from the tech security folks, and they have that conversation, how willing are those risk and senior people willing to go to get their hands dirty in understanding the tech? How much detail do they want from the tech security folks to say, look, here's what we've done? How far does the conversation have to go, and does it go?
If they really trust if you'll find if the tech security guy goes out and says, this is what it is, and this is the residual risk, and they are credible, then they don't actually need to go into the detail, because they've that's the expert. You as a CEO will employ experts right across your business, and if you've got confidence in them, which you should have confidence in them, then there's no need to get what I like to call is a long-handled screwdriver out to dig into exactly what you've got. You've got to be brutally honest as the infosec person and say, well, this is what I've got in place, and therefore that means that the residual risk is this, and the impact to the business is that. This could happen. Over to you. So, for example, we talk about, a lot of organizations have gone down the, high availability route, for their IT. So you've got, automatic failovers between various data centers. And obviously, in order to get some of the, recovery time objectives, or the, the uptime, they've sort of flattened that infrastructure. Now, what that means is that that's fabulous for fault tolerance. And it's fabulous for small, isolated sort of incidents. But what it does do, it increases the big catastrophic failure. So it's going to be low probability, but it is going to be high impact. And you just go up and say, well, actually, this is what I've done over here. And the business will go, yeah, fantastic, that's what I want. Actually, I want that to happen. Now you've told me that actually I need to be prepared for catastrophe. Okay, I'll take it from here. If you get in there early and start having those conversations, everyone's got the same. Whenever I go into an organisation and working with them or working in an organisation, I always like to point out to everybody, look at your pay slip. We've all got the same logo at the top of it. We're on the same team. It's not a them and us. We're all going to that that same aim.
Yeah, let's talk about testing of all of this, because part of resilience is simulating an attack. How many of those exercises have you been involved with, and how successful are those sort of desktop tests?
It's interesting. You've got to do realistic testing. So in a cyber scenario, you've got to sort of simulate the stress that people are going to be under. I'm not a great fan of just all of the super duper bells and whistles and the full sort of simulations, realistic simulations, etc. Because actually, what you're trying to do is to simulate the stress and the decision making within the business. So as long as you can create that stress, and there's all sorts of things you can play to create that decision making issues in the boardroom. But it is about people rehearsing some of those really big decisions, like do I pay the ransom? Do I not pay the ransom? Do I turn off the IT? Do I not turn off the IT? Do I recover over to somewhere else? Do I communicate out to the stakeholders? If you haven't already thought those through, then they become really difficult in a stressful situation. And I often find that organisations, especially at the board level, have put a lot of development, personal development, into their business as usual behaviours. And they're not aware of actually how those translate into a stressful situation. And I heard a sort of fabulous quote a couple of days ago when I was listening to a podcast, and they were saying that, if you put a carrot into hot water, it goes soft. If you put an egg into hot water, it goes hard. If you put coffee into hot water, it changes the chemical composition. And people are the same. If you put them in hot water, they will do one of those, one of those different things and react in those different ways. And you need to know beforehand what those are, so that you can personally develop on it. Yeah, I can, under stress, I know that I can be quite directive. You know, I don't mean to be, but actually in a stressful situation, if I'm the crisis leader, I have to hold myself back from just telling people what to do, because that doesn't always work. Yeah.
Interesting. By the way, Jenny, my co-host, had a pop at the infrastructure song, Down the Highway Route 66. No, not quite right. We're looking at infrastructure, telecoms infrastructure, maybe. Sandra, that's really interesting. I wonder, I'm interested in how you...
Hanging on the telephone?
Oh, it's close. It's close. That might be, it's not there, but it's close.
I'm showing my age, aren't I now?
Oh, now Jenny's got it. Wichita Lineman was the song I was thinking of, but I think Jenny's probably already got a Tice mug, so maybe we'll save that one over till the next time. Sandra, I'm interested in this. How do you simulate? Give us some tips. Like, how do you simulate stress, and how do you put people under stress in those, in the kindest possible way, of course, in those simulations?
Okay, so you've got two types of stress. When you're in a crisis situation, you've got job stress, which is about the environment, the stress of the actual environment that you're in there. And you really create that by providing a richness to the scenario that you're presenting. You're saying, this has happened, that's happened, and you make that in their mind as realistic as possible. You don't actually need to, physically have bombs going off in the background and smoke coming in and, and people running around like headless chickens. Actually, you just need to present one thing after another, and then you get people into that heightened sort of discomfort. And then you've got decision stress. Now, decision stress is about actually making that decision, and obviously, as the name's entitled, but it's what you tend to find is the higher the stakes decision, the more psychological discomfort that people are in. And you often find, and obviously when you're doing a crisis and making crisis decisions at a strategic level, they're really high stakes indeed. And so what you need to do is to make sure, rather than, sort of just ask for lots and lots of, when you're doing simulations, you often go, lots and lots of little, decisions, get them to do that. And then, because you've then got time to record what their responses are if you're doing a test. Actually, no, just hit them with some really big ones, really, really quickly. And then what you'll then find is that you can get people into that mode where they'll just simply make a decision, just simply any old decision. It doesn't actually matter. It's just relieve anything that will relieve that psychological discomfort. And so it's all about, sort of making it, simulating that psychological discomfort, and, taking them up to that level until you've got you start encountering those, those behaviours that you potentially don't want to have. And then you go sort of like, okay, time out. Yeah. What have we done here? Okay, let's force a proper decision-making model, and actually take your time when you're doing it. Don't do that knee-jerk reaction. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Get used to that uncomfortableness, and just go, right, okay. And you get acclimatized to it like everything else.
And presumably also, you get to learn how the other people in the organization behave. For example, you say you tend to take the lead. That's how that person will respond, how your team members will respond.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm interested by this. I wonder if we could do a poll. We have our Tice elf who beaves away in the background, and I wondered if we could do a poll about whether Are simulations, are cyber simulations genuinely effective? I guess that would be the question. Are cyber simulations genuinely effective? Yes or no? Let's have a poll on that and we can get your views. I'm quite interested as to where people sort of stand on this kind of thing. But while people are mulling that, Sandra, let's have a think about this Colonial Pipeline attack, which obviously hit the news. So, what we know so far, Colonial Pipeline get hit by a ransomware gang. We think it's the dark side gang. Ransomware takes effect. The company's then forced to take its pipeline offline and then has to get permission from the government to ship the petrol by tankers. And there are now queues at petrol stations. The thing I find remarkable about this is it does sound like I read these security companies' reports, and every now and again they map out a hypothetical scenario of what could happen, and people will be queuing at the petrol stations. This is actually happening. This is a remarkable, absolutely remarkable attack. I mean, from a resilience point of view, what do you make of it?
Well, as I say, it sort of it strikes me that people have sort of had a bit of an over reliance on it won't happen. They haven't done that thought through. What is the worst case scenario? They've done that lull into false sense of security is the security's there. And the other thing that strikes me is that there's not much coordination. I know sort of when you're responding, it's impacting very wide scale impact, lots of people. So from social, from emergency services, businesses, etc. And actually, there needs to be a coordination of that. At the moment, everybody's sort of running around, doing the best they can, looking after themselves, like people filling up their cars, and and even being told not to fill up your car, etc., and tankers coming in. It's sort of like it really needs, really shows that actually, if you really do need to coordinate these things. Number one, you need to think of actually the worst case scenario is what is going to happen, and then just walk it through. You're never going to encounter it. It'll never turn out, whatever you think up and whatever scenario you think, it could be slightly different. But actually, it just gives you a framework, to move forward with.
Interesting stuff. On our poll, by the way, on cyber simulations, are they effective? 73% said maybe sometimes, 27% said yes, always, but nobody said never effective. So there's some value in those as well. It's interesting, Sandra, I think that the Colonial Pipeline thing, it's interesting that nobody sort of thought ahead to the point where there might be fuel shortages and people might panic. That seems to be the bit that's not been in the plan. But listen, let's bring in the rest of our panelists now. I'm delighted to introduce, we've got Martin Booth, who is CISO at Euromoney Institutional Investor. Also welcoming Ben Lindgreen, who's Head of Cyber Resilience at Pay UK, who are both going to be joining us on the teissTalk stage imminently, if indeed their internet connection holds up. Ben, good to see you. You're first up. Tell us about Pay.uk then. What's the business do, and how big is it?
So we run the UK's national retail payment systems, so BACS, faster payments, and check and credit with the image clearing service. So we're part of the UK's critical national infrastructure, and altogether in 2019 we processed over 9 billion payments, which had a value of over £7.5 trillion.
Astonishing. Absolutely. So basically, when you go into a shop and you put your card into the machine, is that what part of that?
So those payments are typically through Visa, MasterCard, American Express. They're card payments. We do the pipes for payments for whenever direct debits, when you make a payment, a bill payment through your online banking, where the infrastructure that enables the individual banks to connect to each other and transfer that money from one party to another.
Right. Really critical part in that case of the national infrastructure. We're very glad you could spare some time for us in that case. Martin from Euromoney Institutional Investor. Again, tell us a bit about Euromoney. What's the size of the business, and what are the various branches of it?
Sure. Yeah. First things first, though, I'm on Virgin Media, so apologies if I drop off. My internet for the last 3 weeks has been virtually every call I've been on, so apologies if I drop off.
Looking good so far, Martin. It's fine.
Good. Okay. So yeah, Euromoney Institutional Investor. It's a complicated business, really. It's a FTSE 250 data business now. It's kind of moved away from publishing. So we've got about 80 businesses or so that make up the group. Some of the group CISO, I look after all those businesses. And we've got businesses that vary from pricing businesses. So if you wanted to know how much to pay for tungsten steel in Australia on any given day, we've got a business that'll tell you that. We do anything from secondhand aircraft. We've got an asset management strategy business. So they do publications around where to put money, and then we've got a large events division, so about 600 events a year we run from our events division. So quite a mixed business, really.
Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting. So there's a sort of Bloomberg-esque aspect to it, where Bloomberg's a publisher, but also it's a massively important business information side. It sounds like that's the territory that you're roughly in.
Yeah, one of our competitors, Informa. We've got quite a few. So yeah.
Good. It's interesting. I want to. So the after this Colonial Pipeline attack, FBI and the CISA, the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency in the US, put out some updates about this, which I think there's a link in the chat there. What's really interesting, if you look at that link, the stuff that CISA is talking about, it's quite interesting because you can sort of see what happened to Colonial Pipeline by the stuff that the CISA is warning about. But the stuff that I found really interesting was that the remediation for it was things like patching, not allowing your network to accept Tor connections, blocking known bad addresses, looking out for phishing emails. This all just seems sort of very kind of basic stuff. I mean, Ben, is there anything from the Colonial Pipeline story that you've taken that's new? It didn't seem to me that.
So I think the first thing I'd say is that frequently we talk about security basics as if they're easy, and they're not. Particularly in organizations like Colonial, I think they've merged a number of times over the last 30, 40 years. So there's probably disparate systems connecting together. But to get those security foundations right is very difficult. And an attacker only needs to find one weakness to exploit. So no, from the things that I've read, I don't think there are anything particularly new or innovative in the attack. And indeed, I read one article to say that in 2017-18, they had an appallingly bad audit that showed fundamental weaknesses in their cybersecurity. But an attacker, I don't think that necessarily they were targeted by DarkSide from some of the things I read. I think they were just an opportunistic target. And that's always the challenge to organizations. I mean, people frequently say, why would people want to attack us? Well, because you're on the internet and somebody's found a weakness that they can exploit, I think is the answer.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? The scary thing about ransomware is if you've got money and you can be forced to give over money, you are a target. Had a comment from Ben Full. Ben has said, it's the basis for wargaming in the military, purple teaming in cyber, contingency planning in general. As Eisenhower said, plans are of no particular value, but peacetime planning is indispensable, the actual activity of planning. And it's interesting, Sandra, that goes back to the idea of just going through the exercise, regardless of what plan you come out with. The fact that you've been through the planning process, I suppose, is a key one.
Yes, I like the Eisenhower one, but the other one I quite like is the Mike Tyson one. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Yes, it is all about planning. Plans for me are just simply, the audit trail that you've had the planning process and a nice convenient place to put information that you might want to find on the day. So you don't want to be searching around for the name of the plumber or the telephone number when your house is, sort of flooded, etc., etc. But it absolutely is that planning. You've got to think it through. You've got to go, what would I do, in this situation? You're never going to, encounter exactly that situation. And the other thing about, I often find about sort of cyber exercises and, not just cyber exercises, but, general exercises, is that they tend to only look at one scenario. And, I think for anybody that's been on the operational side, for any length of time, sort of disasters are like buses. They don't come one at a time when they're meant to. They all come all at once. I've been on the sharp end of a DDoS attack on a day when, we've had a, sort of a power outage, etc., etc. It's just, that's just life. Sometimes you have a really bad day at the office, and actually you've got to be able to, pick your way through actually what's important, what's not important, and it's that prioritizing.
Indeed. Yeah, thanks for that. We've had a couple of comments, by the way. Federico saying ransomware gangs do research on targets before any attack, which, yes, that's almost certainly true. And also in this case, I mean, the DarkSide ransomware gang, as far as I'm aware, they made the ransomware available. It's not necessarily them who decided to target Colonial and so on. Also, Simon Yakin, I think that's the right way to pronounce it, like the Lazarus Heist, which is my podcast. Lots of planning. Very good podcast. Thanks, Simon. Brilliant.
So, Jeff, I think with regards to the research, what I meant was they look for a vulnerability in the first instance, and then they do the research on the organization. So I wouldn't have said that Colonial Pipeline would have been particularly high on their list of initial targets if they were pulling together a list beforehand. And indeed, they apologized for the impact on society as a result of hacking them. But they do their research once they get that initial vector. I think, it's... as they say themselves, they're in the business of making money. So they will have seen that as an oil firm, they'll be cash rich. So once they've identified that there are weaknesses that they can exploit, they would then target it rather than, their initial target being the oil firm. I think that was just looking for the weakness to exploit.
Interesting stuff. Martin, can we come to you on this? I'm interested. I mean, you're a busy CISO. How often do you get the chance to sort of unplug from that and do an exercise or think about resilience? Because it strikes me as one of those things that you have to sort of clear time in your diary to do. Is that right?
I'm not saying it's something that I specifically clear time in the diary to do. We have to run those exercises on at least an annual basis. We probably do biannual exercises around incident response in areas that we're worried about. Ransomware was the last one, just so that I suppose there's a number of reasons to do that, so that the people that operationally are ready and know the kind of things that are going to come up. But to make sure that the board, because we do run them with the board as well, they're aware of the types of issues that we're looking at managing, and they're aware of their part to play in that. I think from the conversations earlier, I would say I've had that conversation with my board about that, how big a target are we? Euromoney is a £500 million firm, so it's not a small firm. But because it's a B2B firm and it's not a massive household name, I think when I joined the business, a lot of the board members were under the impression that we weren't going to be heavily targeted in cyber attacks. The defenses that we have in place, specifically around our web application firewalls and etc., would indicate that isn't the case, and that I think I would agree with Ben on that the sophistication now of attacks, the maturity of the attack model, I think, is based around scanning IP blocks, so scanning everything out there, finding what you can, what comes back as there's a potential weakness, and then going after it. I think if you start with the research, I think attackers have worked out, if you start with the research, you could research something, to the nth degree, waste a lot of time and money on it, try and find a breach, eventually breach it and find nothing's there. I think people have found it's easier to find the weaknesses first and then work their way in and then see what's inside. And maybe it's nothing, but equally they may not have expended much effort to find that out.
Yeah, so shoot first and work out who you've shot later on. Yeah.
Well, it's so easy to launch the attacks that I think that's the way that they do it, and it's certainly the case with us. I mean, we see a phenomenal amount of people attempting on our network, and you wouldn't think that from the kind of size brand that we are.
Martin, can I ask that? That's really interesting. So you went through a sort of exercise, and ransomware was your focus. If you had to pull out a couple of the key lessons from that, what were the key ones that you came away thinking? Right, that's exactly what we have to. That's the key thing we have to do.
In terms of what to do in sense of ransomware, or in terms of what to do in the kind of managing of that process?
Just in terms of having been through the exercise, either preventive measures or remedial measures once it's happened. After the exercise, what were the things you realised were the key things?
Well, I think that a recovery from ransomware should arguably relatively straightforward, right? You want to reduce the spread of a ransomware attack, and then you need to recover from backup. So we've had a few ransomware incidents, same as most companies. Luckily, they haven't been massive. I think we lost a file share for a couple of days, which was significant for the business unit involved, but on the grand scheme of things, could have been a lot worse. So I think the outcome of those, frankly, is preparation and control assessment. So are there things you can do just to stop ransomware? Yes. Are there things that you can do to prevent the spread of ransomware? Yes, and it's making sure that those component parts are being put in place appropriately, and that you have assurance that they're working correctly and that they cover the right areas. So we have been doing that. I think the biggest part that we've come out of ransomware is that we're now deploying endpoint detection and response capabilities, so that we can, if an endpoint becomes infected, we have a much improved ability to kind of lock that device down automatically before it spreads to other devices laterally through the network. I think that the belief that people have got everything in separate network segments and everything's very locked down. Most businesses don't operate like that. We certainly don't. So we really need to make sure that a compromised device is not going to start spreading through the network. And I think there are technologies that can help with that, which is sometimes AI powered and sometimes backed by analysts, by quality analysts.
I was going to ask about that, Martin. The fact that your money is so, as you said, it's lots of different businesses. I wonder whether that made the task easier in that you can segment those businesses more effectively. But from the sounds of it, that's not the case. It's not that easy.
No, it's a nightmare. We integrate into largely a central cloud tenant. So those, we have some ability to control those tenants, but they're all in the same place. Other businesses we acquire and they sit on their own infrastructure, because we've made 3 acquisitions already this year, which my team had to due diligence and then integrate. So no, it makes it more complicated. So we're effectively running 80 separate businesses from a small central team.
Good. So can I come to you? Sorry, Sandra. Go on. Go ahead.
No. I sort of picking on Martin's point in terms of the exercising and sort of lessons learned, and it's all of everybody within an organisation is going to have to do stuff in order to sort it. So that from Martin, from a CISO perspective, will be doing stuff on the security. There'll be IT people doing stuff. There'll be business operational people doing stuff, and there'll be the executive doing stuff. And everybody has got to work together. And what I often find is that people haven't thought through who's leading the response to one of these things. Clearly, if it's a large-scale cyber attack, it needs to be led from the board, but they need to be aware of actually what the what the IT have got to do. When Martin talked about, it should be straightforward, coming back from backups 1 or 2 days. But do they know it's 1 or 2 days? Does the business know that? Because it's the board's job to provide the top cover to allow the IT to do that restore from backup without constantly having the telephone go with somebody from the business going, is it there yet? Why is it not back? When can I have it back? You've got to set those expectations up early and to manage it.
Ben, can I come to you on this? I mean, obviously, as you say, your critical national infrastructure. Just talk us through the kind of obligations you're under, from a regulatory point of view, in terms of resilience. What are you expected to do and how often?
So we're regulated by the Bank of England's Financial Markets Infrastructure Division, and recently they've produced a joint supervisory approach with the PRA and with the FCA on organisational resilience. And I think it's a really good approach that they're suggesting for organisations to look at. And I think it takes away a little from considering it just as a cyber issue, because I don't think it is. It's about your whole organisation, and it's about understanding what your important business services are, and more importantly, how long can you be without them? So the concept of impact tolerances. And so you then ensure that the controls that you have and the mechanisms for recovery, the mechanisms for response, reflect and hopefully adhere to those impact tolerances. And I think going back to the Colonial Pipeline issue, what that issue suggested was that they hadn't really considered the impact that an attack would cause on their delivery of oil to the eastern seaboard, which has caused all of the subsequent run-ins. And I think part of that, I was surprised to learn that the pipeline industry, even though it's critical national infrastructure in the US, isn't actually formally regulated. So they've not got a lot of interest from their regulators to ensure that these fundamentals are looked at. And I think our regulators' approach in the financial services to look at this is a really good way to make sure that organisations consider it holistically. And it's not just a case of, if our systems have been up all the time that they're resilient. Frankly, they may have just been well designed in the first place, but all of the people that was involved in those engineering design decisions may have moved on. What happens if you need to bring something up from bare tin? Have you tested on that? And going on to the points that Sandra makes. And I think the other thing I'd say is that frequently when we test under perfect circumstances. Everyone in your your goal team for instant response, you always make sure that they're in. Everyone knows their places. Well, that doesn't happen in the real world. They're almost guaranteed to lose a couple of those key people to holidays, to being on a plane, traveling in normal times. And organisations need to test those things as well.
But this goes back to Sandra's point about everything happening at once, Ben. I mean, how far do you go to prepare for that kind of black swan incident where it's like, your data center's hit by a plane and you're hit by ransomware and the CISO has fallen ill, and how far do you go to prepare for the almost outlandish
So
Yes.
for organisations like ourselves, the requirement from the Bank of England is extreme but plausible scenarios. And I think any of those that you've just mentioned are extreme but plausible scenarios. The PRA's view is that it's severe but plausible for the scenarios. But I think it is valid. I mean, the global pandemic over the last year has shown us that these instances occur, and arguably a black swan, a ransomware like we saw with NotPetya, that taking out every single piece of technology that you have practically. These things happen frequently, and I'd argue that if, like ourselves, you've got an extreme but plausible scenario to consider, if it's happened, somewhere else in the world, then that's extreme but plausible. So you need to consider these things.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I mean,
Sandra,
I mean, those high level things. If you've just got a a little incident, a little outage or an operational outage, that's by that can be dealt with from the operational perspective. So that's not a crisis. That's if your building's burnt down, that shouldn't be a crisis. That's just an operational issue that you should have thought through and that you should have managed. It's those really big ones that actually the board should be thinking about those. That's their job to think and prepare the organisation to do that. I mean, picking up on Ben's in terms of the regulation. I mean, for me, that regulation is very much like an MOT on your car. It's saying to us, financial organisations, that you need to be resilient, and you can be resilient for there's the need, to make sure that you don't, harm customers or the financial markets. There's the want, so that the board's risk appetite, and there's the desires about wanting to sort of grow despite something going on. You can set that wherever you like, that risk appetite. But the PRA and the FCA, what they're asking us to do is to demonstrate that lower level once a year from self-assessment. Can I do really important business services, i.e. those that would harm people, and to just demonstrate that you've got it. So it's just like doing the braking test on the car once a year, and it's an MOT. You can put your appetite wherever you like.
Interesting stuff. Thanks, Sandra. The MOT analogy is an interesting one. Some interesting discussion in the chat. Tony Pamphlet saying, what's the point of planning a response to a cyber incident if ill-prepared board members are the ones to suddenly lead it? Sandra says you have to prepare them. And Martin says, my experience, boards do not lead responses, senior operational resources do, but boards need to understand the process and potential damage to the business while recovery is being enacted. Interesting stuff. Can I come back to you, Ben, just quickly on that? I mean, one thing about your business is, as you say, there's the amount of transactions you're processing is amazing. And I think about this Colonial Pipeline attack and the people queuing at gas stations in the US. To what extent does your planning go towards telling the public, look, don't worry, your direct debit will go through? That public fallout and sudden panic. Is that part of the resilience plan that you do?
Absolutely. Communications has to be a key element of it. And because of the nature of our organisation, the service that we provide, it's not just communications with ourselves, but it's also with all of the participants, so the banks and the building societies that are actually sending these transactions. So we need to ensure that people are made aware and that the communications process is robust. And again, that goes back to testing. And I think also going back to the point that Tony made about ill-prepped board members, the ones to suddenly lead it. Sometimes that's what happens in an emergency. I think Sandra touched on that really well earlier. You can have a very clear response plan. You can have a gold, silver, bronze team. But sometimes what you can get when something major, a crisis does happen, that individual board members or individual executives think that they suddenly need to be part of this. And all of those well-designed plans and preparations that you had get thrown by the window. And that's something that organizations need to really test themselves to actually make sure that they don't fall into that trap. I did hear of one organization when doing tests, one of their senior executives was always the type that felt that he needed to be involved in every decision. So when they were doing one of the tests, they had it that he was on a plane traveling back from India for the whole of the test. So they had to have other people making those decisions. That's how you test your resilience, by making sure that you don't have key individuals that are always at the center of things, because frankly, some of these instances can happen can last for multiple days, if not multiple weeks, and you'll very quickly get burnout of those key people.
Yeah, interesting. Martin, can I come to you on this? There's been interesting back and forth. Richard in the chat, Richard's saying the best response in these markets where the board members take active involvement and engage with the process and don't just delegate. Martin, there's a balance here, isn't there? On the one hand, you're saying that's great, yes, board members engaging. On the other hand, you're saying, look, the operational people just need to get on with this. How easy is it to strike that balance?
Well, I think incident response and managing incident response is a skill, and I think that not everyone has it. And I think your security leader and probably your IT leader should have that skill and be able to manage major incidents. I think critical incidents, our CEO certainly, who's quite hands-on, would want to be heavily involved in the management of those incidents. And we have formal escalation paths that for certain incidents he gets informed and he's quite involved in those processes. He sometimes sits in on the incident response rooms and the war room. So I think it varies. As long as you've got somebody that is the delegated leader for critical incidents, or a number of people ideally that are the delegated leaders, and that they're involving the right people with the right escalation paths, then I think that's the best that you can really do to strike that balance.
Yeah,
I think for me, it's the difference between an incident, an emergency, and a crisis. So, I mean, a lot of the time we're talking about, sort of operational incidents. And absolutely right, operational incidents should be managed by the operational people when you've got plans, etc., etc. But a crisis is when that has got to the point where you're threatening the strategic objectives of the organisation, and that's an awful lot higher. And that's when you do need the input from the board to say, well, actually, it's threatening, the whole strategy or existence of the organisation in which you need to do that. I think what we're finding too often is that things are being categorized as crises when actually they're not. They're just major incidents, and actually are best managed at the operational end. And because they've been categorized as crises, the board go, oh, it must threaten the strategic nature. I must go and do this. And then they find themselves trying to manage the operational bit, which, they've got experts to do that. And so I think if we can, sort of, be very clear in our terminology and those escalation paths, then I tend to find that things calm down, quite a bit.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. We're pushed for time. We're going to have to bring things to a close. Final comment from Neil King. The other area you need to plan is restraining over-helpful employees that are too customer focused, which is an interesting point. Thanks for that, Neil. My final point on the colonial pipeline thing is one really interesting thing in that CISA report, which is they don't think that there was any intrusion into the operational technology side of colonial pipeline. So why'd they shut the pipeline down? I think that distinction between what's IT and what's OT is now out the window, because at the point where OT isn't compromised, but you've still shut a pipeline down, well, what are we really talking about? Anyway, final thought from me there. I want to thank our guest today. It's been a fantastic panel. Thank you, folks, for your time. Sandra Bell, risk and resilience expert at the Business Resilience Company. Martin Booth, CISO at Euromoney Institutional Investor, and Ben Lindgreen, who's head of cyber resilience at pay.uk. Next week, 4 p.m. on Tuesday, my co-host Jenny is doing the future role of the CISO, which should be really interesting, particularly for a lot of our attendees. Thanks to all of you folks. Remember, we're live 10 a.m. Thursday, 4 p.m. Tuesday. Have a great rest of the week. We'll see you again soon. Cheers all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.